Productivity. Gladiator.
I'm Brian Nelson Palmer, and on this show, I talk about personal, practical productivity skills. And in this episode, we're talking about your purpose. And here's how your purpose has everything to do with your productivity. With me on the show today, my guest is Stan Phelps, who is a certified speaking professional and global speaking fellow, and he's the author of the Goldfish series of books that are right in this lane. So, Stan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
And say a bit about your background. So we're going to be talking about your purpose and what that has to do with your productivity. Talk about your relation to that.
Yeah, so my background was I worked for a couple decades in marketing. I've worked with big brands like Adidas, the New York Yankees, the PGA of America. I've also worked on the agency side. And for me, just my personal story, I worked on some great marketing campaigns and activations, but I started to feel a disconnection in marketing, and I thought marketing could have a bigger purpose. And I just knew I was part of the problem and not part of the solution. And I had this kind of moment of truth that led me on this journey to first start a blog where I spent a year just writing about all aspects of marketing, but I was looking for the one thing that I thought could be a game changer, and I found it, and it led me down this path of creating this kind of big goal of collecting 1,001 examples of this little thing that I found, and that ended up becoming a book, which has now become a series, and now there's 20 books in the series. So
that's amazing. And so And the focus is on marketing or productivity and purpose.
So my background from a marketing perspective was I used to do stuff that was focused on kind of the eyes and the ears and interrupting. And I thought marketing should be more about the experience and the experience that you specifically create for your clients and customers. And so for me, anyway, when I found what my personal purpose was, my productivity soared because I had a clear kind of North Star of where I wanted to go. And that led me to do the work that I've done.
Well, I can't wait to talk about you listening, your North Star and my North Star and Stan's North Star. This sounds fun. Let's do this thing. And I got one other question for you before we dive in, though, and that's, there's a lot of people who talk about marketing or talk about purpose or productivity. So I also want to know, what do you think makes you different from all these other folks that talk about this topic?
If I think about myself, we'll talk about maybe some purpose archetypes. I find myself as what I call the challenger archetype. You know, my purpose is to get people to think differently about how they treat their customers and employees. And so I think that separates me a little bit from those that are quote unquote experts. I also, what separates me, it's not just my opinion. I've collected now more than 5,000 case studies. And what I do is look through these hundreds of examples to see where I can see how successful organizations navigate in this kind of new economy.
Interesting. Okay.
And I truly believe we're in the 4.0 version, Brian, of business. And that purpose is at the center of that. So if I can quickly rewind, I think you only have, the modern corporation or modern business organization really only dates back less than 125 years, right? And for the first 75 years, who came first in the 1.0? It was all about the shareholder. And the purpose of a company, if you were being honest, for the first 75 years, was just to do things to maximize the return to the shareholder. Not a really lofty goal or purpose. In the 1970s, so you only have to go back less than 50 years, I think there was a kind of a shift to the 2.0. And the 2.0 said, profit is important and return to your shareholders is important, but ultimately you can't do this. The purpose of business is to create and to keep a customer. And so
Yeah.
if you put your customers and your clients first, then ultimately you're going to be successful and you're going to generate that return for shareholders. The 3.0, Brian, I think is, dates back to maybe the early 1990s, where there really was an understanding that, yeah, you can put the customers first every day of the week, but unless you have employees that are actually engaged in that mission, right, and in
Yeah.
that you're never going to be able to create those happy. And so you can't create happy, enthused customers unless you have happy, engaged employees. So the 1990s and this 3.0 was really a recognition of how important employees and culture was. Well, I think you only have to go back less than 15 years ago, where we're in now what I call the 4.0. And that's where purpose comes first. And that if you
Yeah.
put purpose and if you understand your why, right? And especially for the younger generations coming in that really
Yeah.
want meaning in what they do,
Yeah.
if you put that at the center of what you do, you get your employees more engaged and bought in. Your customers benefit from that. And ultimately, you create an environment where you're creating that return for your shareholders. So putting purpose
Yeah.
first.
Purpose first. So what do you mean by purpose? Is it the purpose of why we show up or the purpose of the business? Is that just the mission statement and everybody has a mission statement? Talk about that.
No, I think there's a bit, and we'll get into, I think there's a big difference between a mission and a purpose.
Okay.
So you think about any type of organization, maybe your purpose, Brian, or mine, or for any organization, it essentially started with the founder. And why, what was the why behind creating the organization? To me, a strong purpose is like this guiding North Star. It's
There's the
something that
North
drives
Star.
you.
Yeah.
It helps you from a directional point of view. You may never get to that North Star, but it's
True.
always there as a guide in the background for why you do what you do. And I'll give a lot of credit to Simon Sinek, who I think has really kind of shined a light that people don't buy what you do. Essentially, they buy how you do it, and maybe more importantly, why you do it. And the companies that do really do well have a strong understanding of their why, and they're able to create meaning for the employees that are part of the organization.
So it's the why behind what you do. So do you have sort of an example on the difference between a mission statement versus your purpose, or what that actually looks like in words?
Yeah. So to me, if you understand what your purpose is, Brian, then your mission is the things that you do to kind of work towards that North Star or purpose. So if the purpose is the why, to me, the mission becomes the what. If the purpose is the calling for, why you do what you do, the mission becomes the job that leads you to that. If the purpose is all about the heart, to me, the mission is all about the head, right? And to me, the purpose is very ambitious, where the mission tends to be more pragmatic. Does that make sense? The purpose is about the
Just
goal. The mission is more about the plan.
got it. That makes sense. So
Yeah.
then, so how do you know? How do you know if you're acting on the right purpose?
Well, I think in a certain sense, and it's based on how our brain has evolved, Brian.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but 80% of how we view other people comes down to just two basic questions. So the first
Okay.
question is always this: what is the intent of this person that I'm working with or dealing with? And then
Yep.
very quickly, number two is what's their ability to carry out that intent? So this is how our brain
Yeah.
evolved. Our survival depended upon us making split-second judgments about everyone and everything we came into contact with.
Yeah.
And so that intent piece is what social psychologists call warmth.
Okay.
And the ability to carry it out, they describe as competence. Warmth and competence. And here's the thing, when people understand why you do something, they understand your intent. That is a key critical driver of how people view you. And then, of course, you can't survive without being competent, right? So you have to back up what you do. Let me ask you a question, Brian. What do you think is more important, warmth or competence?
It depends. My immediate reaction is it depends. And it's
It
because
depends.
it depends on the circumstances
You
and
have
what
to
I
get
need.
you have to get off the fence, but more often than not, what do
Okay.
you think is more important to people?
More
Warmth
often
or
than not,
competence?
competence, probably. Although warmth is what starts you wouldn't engage with them if they're competent and not warm. So having said that out loud, I think warmth is probably the starting point.
It is. People value warmth more than competence. They're both important, but warmth trumps competence every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Yeah.
You know,
So
that
here's the
has,
thing. How do people, and again, we make these judgments at a very subconscious level,
yeah,
and we make it very quickly. And then we start to look for things that confirm our initial bias or judgment, right?
okay.
So people understanding why you do what you do is absolutely key. And I think, I think we used to live from when we thought about what we did for a living, we used to live in what a friend of mine calls the tyranny of, right,
Okay.
Brian, where you either had to pursue something that was truly gave you purpose and a sense of meaning. But if you did that, you lived the life of like a struggling artist, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or, and the or to that is you did something that was, very lucrative, but at the end of the day, there wasn't a sense of meaning or purpose in what you did. And so you might be very successful, but you might feel empty as a result. And I think
No.
we are now in a place where instead of the tyranny of or, my friend David Howitt calls it the power of and. We
Okay.
can have purpose, but we don't have to sacrifice. We can have both, right?
Yeah.
Profit and purpose.
Purpose. Yeah.
Yeah.
Together. So then I loved that interlude is really powerful I like the warmth part, that it starts with warmth. That's really true when you think about all of your business relationships and who you refer, who you recommend. Most all of that is based on warmth. Even if it weren't competent, if you were going to refer your friend or colleague to somebody and they were incredibly competent, but they were not warm, you would probably not, you wouldn't make that intro. Like job interviews, all of that. I love that tangent.
And
And
here's the thing. When you deal with somebody who is high warmth, you have a sense of why they do what they do, and then they're
Yep.
highly competent. Here's the feeling that we get from that experience is one of pride. Like we understand, we feel part. And absolutely to your point, we go out of our way not only to come back, but to tell other people about our experience, and we become advocates for those organizations.
Yeah. So then, and that kind of circles back to the question then on how do you know that you're acting on the right purpose? How do you know that you found it, you got it?
Yeah. So great. So I think intuitively we can feel it, like in our gut when we know we're doing something. So I'm a big believer of like, listen to your gut, right? We can rationalize in our head a lot of the things that we do, but we can feel when we're off course or we're off center and we're not doing something for the right reason. I think it's also a part of understanding who we are and when have we been in situations where we feel like we're kind of in the pocket or in the zone, like we're doing something that we believe in and that we're really good at it. We may not have mastered it, but we feel like we're truly engaged in what we do. And I think the more that we can understand that, we can go from looking at something that we view just as a job, right? And there's nothing wrong with having a job. You get paid, you can support your family, you support yourself. But I think we can start to move from a job to more of a career. And when you have a career, you tend to be more invested, right? You're in it for the long haul. But I think even if you have just a career, if you can move a little bit more further and get to where it feels like more of a calling, like this is what you would do even if you weren't getting paid for it, is where I think there's true power. And so I think it's trying to move on that continuum to figure out where do we feel like we're more called and that we get energy back from doing the work that we do. And when we do that and when we're fully engaged, we're more productive. And it just fuels us in terms of what we do. Whereas if we're doing something that we feel is more like a job, we tend to procrastinate. We tend not to be engaged. We don't take pride in what we do. And I think our productivity suffers.
One of the phrases that changed my life, this phrase changed my life, and that there's only two answers to the question, hell yes or no. And that's really it. And so to go back to my question was, how do you know you're on the right purpose? I think if you ask yourself that question and the answer is, I think so, that's no. There is only two answers. And if it's not hell yes, then it's no. And I think that drives to your point too, where if you ask yourself, is this my purpose? And your answer is hell yes, this is it, then I think you got it. But if it's maybe, then you're probably not quite there. No, that's not your purpose yet. You haven't found it yet. You can be close, but it's hell yes or no. I don't know, that seems to go with what you're describing is like you go from your career to your calling. I mean, I think it sort of all the same soup that we're talking about here.
I agree. And here's the thing. There's a guy named Mike Michalowicz, and I love how he says this. He says, we need to move away from BHAGs. Do you know what a BHAG is? A big, hairy, audacious
goal. Yes.
Right.
BHAG. So, they got so many of those phrases. Yeah. I've never heard BHAG.
I love what he talks about, he says, we need to get rid of the BHAG and get what he calls a bang. And a bang is a big, audacious, noble goal, right? How do we get in touch with something that we truly believe in? And how can we, towards that North Star, how do we create something that really taps into that we can feel good as we move towards it, right? And it aligns with what our purpose is. So I'm a big fan of that. My big purpose is to get people to think differently about how they market their businesses and to be more about the customer and less about thinking about marketing as, like trying to chase the prospect and get them in the funnel.
Right. Yeah. Oh gosh, I feel you there. My purpose is to teach personal, practical productivity skills, but not so that you can then work more hours or do more stuff. The point is, if you're more productive, that means you are a top performer at work, and there is still time for you to have the amazing life you want to have too. Because if all you do is work, that's where the midlife crisis, and that's just, so I'm with you on, it's the why. The why is not so that you can work more or do more work or work more hours. It's so that you can have that time. So I like that, Stan.
You can have the power of work and life, right?
Yes, it is the whole work-life balance. This all came to the forefront with COVID, especially. I've been doing this long before COVID, but that was the piece that really started people were paying attention, because now you used to be forced to separate them because you were working at work and you were at home. And so life created the differentiation for you. But when you
Right.
do them both at home now, you have to figure that out, and
Right.
you have to defend your life. It's easy to, anyway, that's a total side note, but yes, oh man, the why. I love this conversation. It's giving me goosebumps, Dan. I like this. Like, all right, we're on this right track. It's like the feels good. So let's take that pivot then, because the purpose, it was talking about how purpose levels up your productivity. So let's say you're on the right path, or you're close. You're hell yes. You got the North Star. You're headed toward the North Star. So now
Right.
what does that have to do with productivity?
Well, again, I think when you're aligned with what you do and why you do it, it just makes the how that much easier. You're just more focused and more engaged in what you do. And we
Yeah.
all know how we feel when we've got 100% engagement towards
Yep.
something rather than trying to just check something off the list. And my lens that I look through is to try to get people away from just the transactional nature of business, right? You give me X, I give you Y. And the problem with that, it's a zero-sum game, Brian. Where can you go when you want X, I give you Y, it's equal? You can't go anywhere. So
Yeah.
what I love is this concept of doing a little bit more, something that
Yep.
gets added as part of the transaction. It's a term that comes from New Orleans. It's called lagniappe, and it dates all
Okay.
the way back to the 1800s. And it was back then, and it's still around now. It's typical for a business to do a little something added to honor the relationship. And to me, when you can start doing that and you can start doing little things that kind of elevate your purpose and bring it to life in service of your clients, is when it gets really powerful.
Yeah. It's that little something extra. It's what they always say, exceeds expectations. It's the but it's planned, exceeds expectations, not just, oops, oh, I'm so glad you're happy and you loved it that much. It's, no, I planned to make it that good that
Right.
much. And here's
And
the plan on how we try to do that.
And here's the thing: this was the turning point that led me on this kind of moment of truth. We all have moments of truth that lead us on these journeys.
Yeah.
For me, Brian, it was a simple interaction that I had in New York City. I'm at one of these rooftop bars, and I'm waiting with a colleague. We're about to go to a networking event, and I meet this older gentleman who's on his own, and he's
Yeah.
obvious he's waiting for someone as well. And I just strike up a conversation, and somehow we got on the idea of being on time and the importance of being on time. And I'll never forget it, Brian. He looked at me in the eye and he said, "No one in life is ever on time." And I said, "Wait a second." I go, "I've been on time before." I go, "Not often, but I've been on time." And
Uh-huh.
I'll never forget, he stuck his finger in my face and he gave me the Dikembe finger
Yeah.
wave. And he went, "No, no, no." Then he doubled down. He goes, Brian, he goes like this to me. He goes, "In fact," he said, "on time is a myth." He said, "No one in life ever is just on time." He said, "People in life are either early or they're late." He said, "No one is ever just on time." And I'll never forget, I took the train home where I was living in Connecticut at the time. And I thought to myself, that same reasoning applies to everything we do.
Yeah.
And think about things that we do for the clients and the customers that we
Yeah.
serve. Does anyone just
Yeah.
simply meet expectations? And
Yeah.
if you use that same reasoning, no, you either exceed them or you fall short. And so, given the choice of doing more or doing less, I started to look for companies that did little things. Now, as it
Uh,
relates to purpose, the fifth book in my series is called The Red Goldfish. And it was inspired, why Red was inspired by Bono of U2.
okay. Okay.
Are you familiar with the Red campaign?
No, tell me about that.
So the Red campaign, there's just a ton of companies that have kind of partnered in this, but it's a very simple concept. So Apple, for example, is part of the Red campaign. They will create a certain product, maybe like an iPhone, that's red. And the idea is it's a limited edition product, special product. And when you buy it, a certain part of your purchase goes towards charity.
Interesting.
And so it was this model that could raise money, not by just giving money, but by buying something and working with for profits that gave a little something back as part of it. And so the red goldfish, my co-author and I, Graham Newell, we looked at over 300 organizations that really were purpose driven of
Okay.
how they did little things to be
Yeah.
able to bring their purpose to life for both their
Got it.
employees and their customers.
That's so a little something extra and to give back. I like
Yeah,
this.
and to
Are
bring
we
that purpose and the why to life. Yeah.
so let's circle back to the productivity part of it then. So if you have your purpose and you said that has everything to do with your productivity, are we talking really about it's the want and the desire? I found my why, so you're willing to do more, and so you're more enthusiastic, which means you do more? Or is there talk about the productivity aspect of it?
So I think when you understand your why, again, I think you're more engaged. I also think you're more resilient,
Okay.
right? You're able to look at things not as problems, but as challenges. And every challenge can be addressed. And when you realize that, hey, I'm working towards this higher purpose, you realize, hey, in your lifetime, you may never get to that North Star. But if you can see incremental progress, to me, that fuels productivity. And here's the thing. I'm going to go back to, I do a lot of work with organizations around employee engagement. And when people are bought into the why for the organization, they're more productive, they stick around longer, and they're more engaged in what they do.
Yeah.
And just as a byproduct of that, again, having that engagement, being bought in, you tend to be more productive.
I think it's probably important that we talk about the focus that it gives you by locking in on that purpose too, because productivity just isn't just about the number of widgets or the number of emails you respond to or the number of tasks you complete, but it's also about moving you toward that North Star. And so if you're focused on that purpose, it also keeps you from going off all of the side tangents that come up all the time. Your boss has, the boss comes and they say, hey, I think we might have a new opportunity here to do something else, to add to what we're already doing. And everybody's looking at the boss going, I'm already busy. With what bandwidth should we do this? And the boss is thinking it's a good idea because maybe they went to a conference or they got some idea from somebody and they read some book and they're like, oh, let's do this too. And you could look at them and talk about the North Star and say, hey, does this fit that? Is this going to move us closer to that? And is it better than all the other things that we're already doing at doing that? Because by choosing not to do the things that won't take you to the North Star, you will go significantly faster toward that North Star by maintaining that focus on your purpose, your why.
Right.
I think that's huge.
Yeah. And here's the thing, the Gen Zs that are now coming into the workplace and have for the last decade almost, they're looking at meaning and purpose and they're putting that ahead of compensation. They're the first generation to do that entering the workforce. So if you can't be able to attach meaning to what they do, and you can't, in addition, you can't give them the flexibility of how they do that, they're going to find somewhere that does.
Man, Stan, I don't know. I struggle with that because I think, you listening, if you listening right now, think about your own paycheck. If if you were to have an outstanding purpose and your money were to, and the pay that you're getting were to be less, I see them both as tied, but I have a hard time thinking that they would choose purpose over compensation. I don't know. You challenged me earlier with you have to pick one, and so I guess I see that, but
again, I don't think it's an or, it's an and.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Again, I'm just saying, as they rate opportunities that they're thinking about, purpose and meaning is more important. And here's the thing. When they get into the organization, if the organization's values don't live up to kind of what they've been told, 6 out of 7 will leave when the values no longer fit with their own and what they've been kind of sold when they're coming in.
Yeah. Wow. It's definitely true. And I think to some extent, every one of us thinks about that too, because even if you have, like earlier you were talking about, you have the really high compensation, but not good purpose. And then over time, it's not really sustainable. And then at some point you're just it's the midlife crisis. It's the, oh my gosh, what have I been doing with my life? The people who are really mission oriented don't have midlife crises where they need to go buy the sports car and do, like, that's not a thing. If the why and the North Star, they've been headed that direction.
Right.
So,
there's
like,
alignment.
Compensation. Yeah. It's the and, because you do need to have some of that purpose, and you can find that purpose in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be, I feel like there is, I don't know, tell me what you think about this, Stan, because I have always struggled with the idea, like, for example, I'm a diabetic and I need health insurance. And so I maintain a day job, even though Productivity Gladiator is my calling. And I do that because I have to pay my bills, and diabetes is a freaking expensive disease to have to live with every day.
Right.
So I don't have the luxury yet of only doing the North Star, burn the boats, forget everything else. I'm just going to figure it out. So I've found an and my day job career is actually pretty fulfilling. So I think there is a world where you can be, if you're moving toward your North Star, maybe at a little slower pace, and the day job complements that, you can do that sustainably. And I don't feel like I have a midlife crisis and I need to quit everything and buy a sports car. And like, I freaking love the life I have. So I don't know. I struggle with that sometimes, because I agree that if there's one purpose, it makes it easier. But I do think that there's balance. Talk about that.
Well, I don't think it's an or thing, right? And I think there's the power in the and. You can do both. In fact, it's like 40% now of people in the workplace don't just have one job. They have multiple jobs. Right? And this is interesting. This is the first time, I talked about Gen Z earlier. This is the first generation that when they asked, would you want to go work for a company or would you rather work for yourself? Over 60% picked, I'd rather work for myself. And they're also the first generation, like I say, if there's one word that really encapsulates them, it's integration, right? They don't see, like, I'm a Gen Xer. For us, it was work-life balance, right? Work hard, play hard. For them, it's like they can wake up in the morning, work, take time in the late morning for themselves, go back. Literally go back and forth. That's inconceivable to probably my generation. They can work 2 or 3 jobs, right? And I think part of that is there's probably a side hustle or something that they do that's really fulfilling to them, that allows them to have, the life that they want.
It's true.
And the control and flexibility that they want as well.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Stan, talk about, so what does your purpose need? Let's say you're sitting here. We asked that question earlier. We talked about, if you're not at the right purpose, then It's the hell yes or no. If you're thinking about your purpose and where you're going right now, and the answer is not hell yes, then what does your purpose need? What do you do? Stan, what's your advice to that person listening?
Well, I don't know if I have a ton of advice for from a personal perspective, other than to trust your gut, look back in your life when you've been the most engaged, or you felt a strong attachment to what you did, you felt meaning in what you did. When my co-author Graham and I looked across these 300 organizations, my struggle was, hey, it's not just important to know your why, but I said, are there types of whys out there? Because I wanted companies to go, oh, I can see myself in this archetype, right? My purpose might ultimately be different. So I'll give you, there's 8 archetypes when we looked across these hundreds of organizations. And really quickly, the first is what we call the protector archetype. So think of like Patagonia out there. They're all about the environment, right? Giving back, creating a more sustainable world. The second type is the liberator. And the liberator is all about freedom. It's about finding new ways to do things, giving people personal freedom. So like Harley Davidson is what I call a liberator archetype. They're all about helping people to find their own freedom and identity through motorcycling. The third one is the designer. The designer is looking at new ways to be able to do things. Like Apple's a great example of like a designer brand. How can they create simplicity? The fourth is what we call the guide. And so the guide kind of helps people navigate. So Google is a great example of the guide. The fifth is what we call the advocate. And the advocate is they stand up and they're advocating for a group or a cause or something. Like AARP is a great example of an advocate. The sixth type is the challenger, and the challenger is, I put myself in that category. It's really challenging people's way of doing things and figuring out maybe there's a better way. And it pains me to say this because I used to work for Adidas, but Nike to me is the ultimate challenger brand. They're like, if you have a body, you're an athlete. Like everyone can be an athlete. And they give you the tools and the tips and the motivation to be able to go out and achieve. The seventh type is what we call the unifier. And the unifier is about kind of bringing people together. And like Whole Foods is a great example of that. Like really trying to, through their packaging and through everything they do, to kind of bring more sustainability and define what organic means. They're trying to unify the industry. The last one is what we call the master. And this is kind of like Jedi type of stuff, or like Yoda would be the example. We have people that represent each of these archetypes, and like Yoda is the one, the ultimate master. And that's really rethinking the way an industry works and being super attached to purpose. So like Warby Parker is a great example of like revolutionizing eyewear, but doing it in a way that it gives back in a sustainable way, and also leads the way for how other organizations can act in that manner. So protector, liberator, designer, guide, advocate, challenger, unifier, master. To me, if you can see yourself in one of those archetypes, it may be easier for you to understand what really motivates you for your why. And at least from an organizational level, that's what I was really happy with, being able to contribute to that conversation.
And Stan, I want to yes and you on that, because there are definitely a couple of those archetypes that I think that I identify with, and it makes sense that you and I know each other and we keep in touch and stuff, because Challenger is one of the ones that I also, because that's Productivity Gladiator, is about challenging the way that you've always done your personal and practical productivity stuff. And how do we level that up, but also for the why. So like I identify with some of that. And my yes and here is if you're listening to this or watching this and you want more purpose, there is this fallacy that I think is out there that I want to squash this right now, which is you don't have to totally quit your job and quit your life and start over to get going in that direction. What you can do instead, and what I hope that you'll do, two things. One, if you're miserable at your job and you definitely know you need to totally shift because your 8 hours that you work is just painful, then think about one of the biggest hurdles that people have is the golden handcuffs. You talked about getting the money back, right? You make a good salary, so you don't want to lose how far you've come in the salary bracket and go all the way back to the start. And you can't do that. People with families can't do that. People with diabetes can't do that. But what you can do is find the companies that are like you, the archetype, like you just said, and find one that is tangentially related to the career you already have and the experience you have, so you won't drop down. So like, for example, I'm going to call her out. My sister was trying to make a switch, and she worked in property management, and she wanted to get out of property management. But if you go to another career, you'd have to go all the way back to the bottom. So instead, what you can do is, what are the things that are tangentially related to property management where all that experience counts for something, but the business does something else? So it could be property management software, or it could be a service that supports property management, or it could be something with Airbnb or something where all of that property management counts for something. And same thing if you're in IT and you're tired of writing code and you want to brand, like that's that thing. So if you look for the companies that have the archetype, like Stan's talking about, and you look for the ones that are tangentially related to what you have, that's a way for you to make a move without having to go. It's like Chutes and Ladders, where you take the chute that goes all the way back to the beginning and starting. Like, no, don't do that. You don't have to. Or volunteer with, everybody needs volunteers. Volunteer with an organization. Find a nonprofit that does this and volunteer with them and try it out. Start. The hardest part is to start. So I hope that you'll take Stan's idea of archetypes. I love that. And don't just sit on it. Do something about it. Take a little step, try a little something, go volunteer, bring your family to volunteer. There's ways to do this.
And I think what's interesting is that it used to be, again, go back business wise, it was always an or question. You were either for profit or you were nonprofit.
Yeah.
And now with B Corps, certified B Corps, benefit corporations, there's now this gray area between the two. And this was the premise of our book, is that going forward, people will not look at you either as nonprofit or for profit. They will either look at you as for purpose or not for purpose. And they're going to want to work for and do business with companies that are for purpose. And that's where I think you have to align yourself going forward.
Yeah. Stan, talk about this for you. What does this mean for you personally? What drives you about this? This is your North Star, but what is it about this that drives you?
Well, for me, through the keynotes and the workshops that I give, it all ties back to that initial purpose, which was to get people to think differently about business and less about trying to attract the prospect and more about taking care of the customers. And so my marketing background, I thought the customer was the end all and be all. And then I realized, no, because the companies that I studied that really got it for the customers put their employees first. And then when I started to study the companies that really put their employees first, I realized really quickly, hey, they're also really steeped in why they do what they do. And they put purpose before even their employees. And so everything I've done now, that 11 different colors in the series, and we've talked about red, it's all been, for me, how my thinking has evolved over the years and how I've looked at different things, but it's all led back to that North Star of rethinking business, and putting more of an emphasis on the experience that we provide, what I call a differentiated experience.
Yeah. Now, Stan, we've talked about a lot today. If people are interested in our conversation, I say we've talked about a lot, but also you've written a lot of books about this now. You're quite accomplished in the author. If you haven't looked up Stan, check out his books. I'll drop the link so you can see his books there. But oftentimes, where do you start in that? So if you were really inspired by Stan and I's conversation, Stan, which book should they pick up to start with what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think either Red Goldfish, or you could go back to, I call it the OG, the original Goldfish. That's Purple. And the first three in the series is Purple, customers, green is employees, and gold are your most important customers and employees. And that was strategic because the three colors of Mardi Gras are purple, green, and gold. And New Orleans is the birthplace of that word I shared before, lagniappe, the idea of doing a little bit more, to honor the relationship. And and then I'm not going to share the rest of the colors because we'd be here all day.
Right. Well, and I thought that was an incognito way of you telling us that you're actually kind of a party boy and you just like to, I mean, it's Mardi Gras. And so like, heck yeah, let's get some beads and let's go down to Bourbon Street. Come on, baby. Like, I thought that's where we were going. So, there's a profound meeting. Oh, lagniappe. All right. Got it. There's a piece of me that's disappointed, but someday we'll go to Mardi Gras together, Stan. And I'm sure that'll be a heck of a good time.
Well, I always love sharing this. Mark Twain, in his autobiography, he spent a fair amount of time in New Orleans when he was young. He said in his autobiography, he said, lagniappe is a word worth traveling all the way to New Orleans to get. And so my hope is we've saved, maybe robbed some people of some fun today, but we saved them some time and money.
For sure. You didn't have to travel all the way to get it. You discovered it. Stan revealed the secret. You secret teller, you. Look at you. That's funny. Well, Stan, here's what I love. I love that you're taking this purpose and this lagniappe and these nuggets that you've captured over the years, and that you're putting them into these books and the speaking and all of the work that you're doing. I saw Stan give a presentation, a keynote at a conference that he and I were both speaking at back in, it was 2014, 2015.
10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, it's scary to think how long ago that was. But at the same time, I definitely remember looking around and everyone in the room was very focused in on what Stan was saying, because he talked about himself as a challenger archetype. And Stan, I will absolutely vouch for testimonial given right here that challenger archetype and helping you think a little differently and think more profoundly. I give you a super high mark. So I love that you're doing this and continue to do this, because it's not easy being speaking and author and all of that. That's not an easy path for sure. So thanks for doing this, and thanks for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brian.
And I'll drop the links to your books, especially the red and the purple, as starting points for folks if they're just checking out the Goldfish series first. Oh, last thing, why goldfish?
So goldfish is a metaphor for growth. So the average goldfish is about the size of your thumb, just over 3 inches. If you had to guess, Brian, what do you think the largest goldfish in the world is? Not a carp or a koi. How many inches?
Goldfish?
Yeah, largest goldfish in the world.
I don't even know. I don't know where to guess. What is it?
Almost 20 inches.
20? Right? That's from your elbow to your hand.
That is the size of an average domesticated house cat. That's average. That's average. Right. Yeah. And so the quick, and I'll try to do it quick for you. How is it? It would be like you walking out of your house right now or your apartment, right, and bumping into somebody who's 3 stories tall, right? How is that? We can't even conceive that, right? 5 to 6 times our size. But here's the deal. If you're a goldfish, they grow their entire life. Their growth is impacted by 5 factors. And here's the thing. Those same 5 factors apply to everyone and their business. And I'll go through them really quick to tell you the goldfish growth factor. Most people have heard the first one, Brian. The size of the bowl or the pond will influence your ability to grow. So if you're a goldfish, the bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more they grow. What is the size of the bowl or the pond if you're in business? It's simply the market, right? The market for people that are interested in productivity, right? The market for people who are looking for a keynote speaker or workshop facilitator. Here's number 2, and it's dead simple. If you're a goldfish, your growth is also determined by the amount of other goldfish in the bowl or the pond. And this one works in the opposite direction. The more goldfish there are, tends to limit their growth. So who are the other goldfish in business?
The other companies. The other organizations.
Your competition.
Yep.
The third one is the most difficult for a goldfish. They're also influenced, their growth is influenced by the surrounding environment that they're in. So the quality of the water that they're in will also play a role in their growth. So the nutrients, the clarity of the water. So what's that in business? It's simply the economy, right?
Yeah.
All of those outside factors influence your ability to grow. Number 4 is how a goldfish does in its first 4 months of life. So they're tiny when they're born. They have 80 to 100 brothers and sisters. You imagine that? They're the size of the top of a pin. And so how they do in that critical period will also be a factor of their growth. And so we say in business, what do you call your first 4 months of life in business? You're a startup.
Yeah.
Right? And how you get started is a big factor in how well you ultimately do. Number 5 is genetic makeup, right? So what is that goldfish born with that kind of separates it from all the other goldfish? And the stronger their genes are, and the more that they're separated, the bigger they typically grow. Conversely, if their genes are weak and they're like everyone else, the less they typically grow. So what do you think genetic makeup is if you're in business?
What makes you different?
What makes you different? Yeah, it's your differentiation. And we're going to come right back to what we've talked about today. You don't differentiate by what you do, right? If we're being honest, we live in the day of the internet. There's a ton of other people that do what we do, right? Yep. How do you differentiate? You differentiate by how you do it, and maybe more importantly, why you do it.
How you do it. Yep.
The warmth and the competence, right? And so I tell people, right, if you've already been in business for more than 4 months, you and I have been both doing this for more than 10 years, we're out. Of the remaining 4 things, what do you control? Do you control the market?
Nope.
No. How about your competition?
Not really.
How about the economy? Please, I tell people, I joke, I go, please see me afterwards, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The only thing you control is how you differentiate and stand out. And again, it's not by what you do, it's why you do it. And I think is equally important, it's how you do it. What's the experience that you provide as you deliver that what? And so that's the metaphor of the goldfish, is that
goldfish.
If you think about it, it's just a metaphor for growth via differentiation.
Yeah, I love it, Stan. Well, if folks want to keep in touch with you and what you've got going on, where's the best place for them to find you?
So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Reach out to me or follow me on LinkedIn. You can also look me up at stanphelps.com.
You got it. I'll drop those links in the notes. So open up the notes in this show, in this episode, and check him out. So thanks again, Stan. This is great. And for you tuning in right now, can I give you something? Do you have a friend or colleague who you've talked about purpose with, you've had these conversations like, why are we doing this? Or should I make a change, or that kind of thing? Would you share the link to this episode specifically with them right now? Because Stan and I would love to know that our conversation actually touched people that are facing purpose and productivity and leveling up their productivity, the purpose question. A few texts back and forth directly with you, not post on social media, but like a direct text to a friend, that because you thought about them, that's going to fill up their cup and your cup way more than any sort of posting online. So that's my request, is if you could text somebody the link to this episode, if you thought about them, please do that for your friendship with them. That'd be amazing.
More hell yeses, right, Brian?
Yes. More hell
yes,
yeses. Please find that yes and hell yes. I love it. And whether you've joined my membership and you've taken the first step of joining the email list, or this is just your very first episode, I love sharing Productivity Gladiator with you, because together these productivity skills are going to change your life. That's a wrap.
Productivity. Gladiator.